Good morning, all. So I made an executive decision a couple of weeks ago as I was thinking about moderating a panel, and hopefully you guys are okay with this. I couldn't get my head around this concept of cooperative measurement models. And what I thought was really more important, and Scott's opening remarks are really key, is before we decide how to measure something, we need to have really good precision around what the business model we're trying to measure is. And if you think about what's going on in television now, television is rapidly going through a transition where we used to be worried about age, sex, demographics. Now we're worried about audiences. Hopefully everybody heard about the Open AP announcement, the initiative between Viacom, Fox, and Turner to move to audiences. And we're rapidly then moving to a world of addressability on traditional linear TV inventory. And I thought it was a better use of time to talk about that transition from the standpoint of what it means from the research company's perspective, what it's like to be a marketer thinking about how to allocate those budgets. So what I'd love to do is bring up the first half of our panel. Please welcome Jaime Power. Jaime is COO of One-to-One Media. They are an independent entity that offers advertisers a turnkey solution to addressable video. Also joining Jaime is Jonathan Steuer. Jonathan is CRO of Omnicom MediaGroup, where he's responsible for all of the research, media research for across all Omnicom agencies. So please join me in welcoming Jaime and Jonathan to the stage. Okay, guys, thanks for being here. So the way I thought we'd start this is with a question for Jonathan. So Jonathan, as you're consulting with OMD's clients, how do you think about the value of audience buying relative to age, sex? And how do you think then about the value that addressability brings on top of that?
Excellent question. Thank you, Howard. The audiences, I mean, we've always been buying on audiences. It's just we define those by age, sex demos as you had these elaborate planning targets that then got reduced to age, sex demos because it was the only way to transact. And I think what's finally happening is we're developing better tools for doing that. But I mean, the value is very different. You know, I use sort of two clients as our case study examples, and they're good ways to think about it. On one end of the spectrum is McDonald's, which is a OMD client. For them, you know, their audience that they want to reach is basically everybody with a mouth, which is pretty much everyone. And they do want to be able to focus a little bit on different creatives to the right people, but the value of their non-target impressions is pretty high, right? So you can argue whether it's 70 or 80 or 90%. It's not nothing. On the other end of the spectrum, we've got SAP, who are a purveyor of enterprise software for very large companies. Their addressable, or their desired audience is really, really tiny. For them, they're willing to pay a premium, whether it's addressable or index-based linear or whatever it is, to get to exactly the people that they want to talk to. Because for them, the value of their non-target impressions is basically nothing, and the target is really small. So I try to sort of think about those as sort of my bookend examples of where I can help McDonald's by getting the right story to the right people more effectively if I'm thinking about more precise audience targets and maybe even addressable for certain campaigns. On the other hand, obvious benefit on the SAP side of the spectrum.
Great, thanks. So Jaime, you've been in addressable advertising for a while, first at Modi, now at One-to-One Media. What do you think of Jonathan's perspective? What does he have right, and what might he be missing?
I mean, I don't think he's missing anything. I think the biggest thing that addressability brings to television is better data. So everyone has intuitively known that television works, right? You have a TV campaign on, you're selling more product, TV's off, you're selling less product. But we haven't had the data like we've had in digital to prove that television works. So now we have better data for both targeting and we have better data for measurements. We're able to show advertisers that you can use television all the way through the funnel, and television isn't only an awareness driver, but television we can now use to convert prospects at the end of the funnel.
Got it. So another question for Jamie. You have a fair amount of what I would call old school TV researchers in this room. I'm one of them, so I don't mind calling myself old school. How does the role of research supporting ad sales, we're used to doing estimates and then using services like Nielsen to see if we actually delivered relative to our estimate. How does the role of research change in a world of addressable TV?
So in the beginning, it's a lot more labor intensive. So when we launched campaigns at Modi 4 years ago, when the MVPDs would give us an estimate, a lot of times they would grossly either under-deliver or over-deliver the campaign because they didn't have all the historic data that we have with Nielsen. So what we've done at Modi over the years, and we do it one-to-one now, is we benchmark everything. So if an MVPD tells us that they think a campaign's going to deliver at X, like we know what it's going to deliver at, and we're able to plan the campaign. The other thing is, the research teams are the ones that are going to know what's happening holistic with a brand's entire schedule. So if an addressable supplier tells you that you need to buy a 10 frequency to drive a conversion, they might not be taking into consideration what's happening on the rest of the plan. So, right now it's really like store all the data that you can have and make sure that you're leveraging it for planning because no one's going to optimize it for you.
So we're doing the same thing, it's just using different data.
It's different data sets and
data.
pulling it all in. Yeah.
Got it. Okay, great. So after you guys leave the stage, I'm going to be interviewing Megan Clarkin from Nielsen. The role of research vendors like Nielsen and Comscore are very different in an audience world and then more so in an addressable world. What do you guys expect them to do for you as we get more away from age, sex, and more to audience and addressable? Jonathan, maybe start.
Well, what I'm hoping we can get to, and Josh Chazen and Bill Harvey talked about this a little bit in the morning session, is that solid balance between big data sources that let us get to the level of granularity that we need to do effective audience-based planning and campaign measurement, and get it to be about we know how to create a target, and then we want to count how many people were actually exposed, and of those, how many actually did a thing that we wanted them to do later, right? That's what effectiveness is about. And I think, you've got Nielsen coming from the very panel-centric side and trying to start to incorporate return path, set-top box, smart TV, whatever other kinds of data. You've got Comscore who've started with the big data set side and now are starting to field a panel. And what I actually need is the combination of the two, and I think that's probably true for most of the folks in the room here. So I just want us to get to that middle ground, both and instead of either or state as quickly as possible.
So panel-informed big data.
Panel-informed big data.
Jamie?
Yeah, a lot of times people are quick to point out the flaws with Nielsen, but what Nielsen does is it gives us a currency to trade on, so it actually protects the advertiser. So as soon as we go into audience-based planning, if we're negotiating off an audience, then the advertiser is going to lose their base and the advantage is going to go to the networks. For right now, even working with Comscore, there isn't a unified impression-based definition. So when you look at the addressable MVPDs, actually, even if they're using Comscore to verify their impressions, they're able to use the algorithm in a different way. So an impression on one MVPD might mean something on a different MVPD. So because I've done this for the last 4 years and that's all I have done, I know how to plan that. But if you think about it, in order to scale addressability, there needs to be a unified definition of an impression. Otherwise, you can't move it forward. NBC doesn't get to decide what a GRP is, and then CBS calls it something different.
Right.
And that impression ideally is at least similar, if not identical, across all the video sources, I would go on to say. And I know we're not anywhere close to there yet, but if we're trying to get to like versus like, you need to have some common baseline.
Yep. I think that's a commercial to stay in the room for the panel after this. Just on that, maybe extending that discussion a little bit. So obviously, as we go to audience and we go to addressability, those only work if you have really good data that's now enhancing the target, right? And one hand it'd be things like Nielsen Catalina, using Catalina marketing on top of ratings data. On the other hand, it's then scoring individual impressions based on its likelihood to be in your target. Who is responsible for the accuracy of that targeting information? Is it the supplier, people like Axiom, people like BlueKai, Exalate? Is there, should as an industry we be trying to move towards standards around that? Because one of the things I worry about a lot is that what we learned in digital may not apply to television because supply in TV is a bit more limited. So could you both comment on that?
So I think everyone is jointly responsible for that. So what's going to happen if it's crappy data in, the MVPDs are going to sell it, the advertisers are going to buy it, then on the back end of the campaign, we're measuring every campaign about how many cans of soup did I sell, how many cars did I sell. So if it doesn't do that, then all of a sudden no one's going to come back and no one's going to pay for any of it. Yeah. Basically every single campaign, we're auditing every campaign and how it does because we're doing it against business results. A lot of times, in the beginning when I was trying to figure out which auto data works the best, is it Experian, is it Polk, is it Newstar? Like we would run all three in different segments and then look at the conversion rate based on the brand's KPI. So no one's going to pay for bad data, so it's sort of bad in, bad out. The other thing that we do with the MVPDs is we generally keep a universal control. So everything that we do is test versus control. So they have the same propensity to go out and buy a car. We keep 10% in target that don't get the ad, 90% get the ad, and then we're able to keep a universal control, and that helps us validate the targeting because in essence, if you don't do better than the general population, then there is no targeting with the data.
Right. Got it. That's great.
As far as responsibility for the data, I think your point about garbage in, garbage out is exactly right. In fact, the most dangerous situation is the one where you use garbage data and it works anyway, because then you don't even get to find out. Yeah. But to your point, it's why the test and control is really, really important. What I would love, and for all of you data and research methodology sellers, I would love something like the food information, nutrition information label about what's in your research product, what's in your data, where did you collect it, what did it get matched to, just more disclosure and more sunshine around what's actually going on, I think is what's going to make it easier as this market really starts to accelerate, because I think that's what we're seeing now.
You have to really dig to figure out what's in there.
You have to really dig to figure out what's in there, and then you still don't know if it's true because there's no way to test it. So please tell us what's in there at a high level of detail so we know whether we can bet on it or not, because that's exactly what we're doing.
Yeah, a couple of years ago at one of the SIM cross media events, Pito, who was at Nielsen at the time, actually presented validation of some modeling that they had done off of the Nielsen NBI data set. It would be great if there were sort of a standard validation thing that was a part of your food nutritional label that you described.
The other thing that's hard with all these validations is that the cost of the data and the tech is quickly starting to outweigh the cost of the media, so deals are starting to be upside down. So you have to figure out a way to manage that as well.
Yep. So in a world of either audience or in a world of addressability, do demos matter, or could we bury age, sex, demographics for once and for all?
I don't know how you trade then, like how you trade off a standard currency, like at scale with TV, and advertisers have these bases that they've owned over years. So if they go away, it's just, for me, it seems sort of like a free-for-all.
So you wouldn't have the benchmark.
Like you keep that, and then you have secondary, that's the currency, and then you have secondary measurement that you can show how it's expressed against, soup buyers.
Got it.
Though, I do think there will be a transition period at the end of which we probably won't guarantee on age, sex demos anymore. Exactly, it's not what you do in digital either. You sort of buy the individual impressions. But that's not going to happen until we get to the point where literally all of those impressions are measurable in a consolidated and parallel way. The other thing is, for certain kinds of targets, age, sex demos are a perfectly reasonable audience to go after. So we definitely want to make sure we don't throw out the baby with the bathwater.
Yep.
Such a horrible expression.
It is a really horrible expression. Sorry.
So when we're talking about addressability on TV, we're really taking a lot of experience from what we've done online with banner advertising, now digital video advertising, importing those practices to TV. Are there best practices of stuff that we know worked well in the digital space that we want to be really precise to make sure we're bringing over to TV? And then the flip side of it is, are there mistakes we made in the digital space that we should avoid repeating?
I'm going to start with mistakes. I think, to the point about data quality, one of the huge mistakes on the digital side has always been taking at face value the kinds of targeting data that folks have used and sort of trying to take that all the way to the bank without properly vetting it and without knowing for sure that what you were doing was fully baked. I think on the best practice side of it is that digital is way further along in terms of thinking about multiple different executions as part of a single campaign and figuring out how to tie those together, perhaps with a consolidated set of effectiveness measures. And again, TV is only baby steps in that area right now. So I'm hoping Jamie and the other folks making it easier to traffic addressable. I mean, I think that's how you start to get those learnings and those proof points. So.
Yeah, I mean, the data, right? Taking the data that we have in digital, applying it to TV is definitely the most exciting part. It's probably the most exciting time to be a part of television because we're taking that and we're, making TV buys stronger. But like Jonathan said, I think that there definitely were some challenges in digital. I mean, we have viewability, we have bots. Luckily in TV, there's no bot sitting in your living room. And then I think arbitrage in digital and, racing to the bottom. Yeah. For pricing was a big mistake. This inventory is valuable. These are high value households that are going to drive transactions, are going to drive sales. So I just think the race to the bottom is the scariest thing.
I think the good news is, to your point about sort of scarcer inventory on the TV side, that will prevent the 87 levels of arbitrage in digital media transactions. But yeah, it's taken years to work those out to the point where you actually knew what you were getting and how much the actual impression cost.
But there's so much that we can do to enhance television if we get the data right, the tech right, and the measurement right. But if it's a race to the bottom, we're not going to be able to afford any of that, and then we're going to deal with the same issues that we dealt with in digital.
Yep. Well, something that's a great way to think about it. One of the things that I think we, just representing Turner, we worry a lot about is that, and it's a race to the bottom, which is today, and I always use this as an example, there's a guy who leads our ad product development, Dan Aversano, who many of you guys know. He's a Villanova grad. During the last 90 minutes of the Villanova championship game a year and a half ago, Dan was watching TV in a very different emotional, engaged state than someone who was watching something at midnight last night, half awake. And in today's ratings world, we rate those the same, as long as you logged into the people meter. Do you guys believe we understand enough around engagement and context so that it's not just it's not just our buying strategies in 5 years or find the cheapest impression against audience and that's what you load up on?
So I think there's tiers of it. So even if you think about addressability, so there's even in a world of everything's fully addressable, we would never say to a client, give me all your money and make it addressable, because then you're not going to drive them all the way down the funnel. This is a way to increase frequency against high value households and then maybe manage the frequency and pay different CPMs against the value of those audiences. So maybe against a broad demography, you're paying 1 CPM, and then you have a smaller segment that you're paying a different CPM, and then you have a nucleus that you're paying like the high value CPM, and then we're able to look at the return on ad spend and optimize each of those buys going forward, because we finally have the data to do that.
Yeah. Do you think we know enough about context and engagement?
I mean, you could always know more. Mm-hmm. And I think engagement, especially as, there's the whole best available screen story. And to the point in the early remarks about sort of the 82 versus 32% or whatever the actual numbers were, I think it would be great to have better data than we have about engagement with not just television programming, but television commercials very specifically. I mean, coming from my TiVo days where I got to learn where people were armed with a DVR, they would skip somewhere on the order of 50 or 60 or 70 or 80% of the spots. Without knowing exactly what's going on there, it's hard to make a guess about engagement with TV advertising. And I think one of the problems with average commercial minute is that it doesn't actually let us get to that. And we've got a whole TV ecosystem based on a metric that doesn't actually include engagement with actual ads at all. I would hope as we start to evolve this and move to a more impression-based world, we can also really track the TV ad impressions.
So this has been a great conversation. So I think what we're now going to do is introduce Megan Clarkin. You guys could stay. So Megan is president of product leadership in Nielsen. She has 30 years of technology, product development, and marketing experience. And she leads Nielsen's global team responsible for product strategy, development, and management. Welcome.